as I'm staring at this thing, saying to myself, you mean to tell me these things are actually real? Like just blown away by such a reality and having to question my own reality and sanity. Like, I didn't know what to think of it all. My name's Hugh Knight, and before getting into all this research, I was always in the forest, always in the woods, very outdoorsy, an avid rock hound, always taking me into really hard to get to places, looking for rare rocks and crystals, things of that nature. And my parents live on an island near the mouth of the Columbia River. And so that's an area that I've grown up exploring and spending a lot of time in. And I had obviously seen things on TV about Sasquatch, Bigfoot, and I just assumed it was all misidentifications, kind of make-believe type stuff, hoaxes. I just wasn't a believer. I was of that mindset that if they were real, I would have seen one by now. I've spent so much time in the woods. And there were some weird experiences that took place in that area prior to seeing a Sasquatch. And so I've always been open-minded to paranormal stuff and open-minded to the reality of us not really knowing what's surrounding us. And like, for example, a few years before I had my first sighting, there was a major UFO event that took place in the skies over that area, which technically are the skies above my research area. And that was witnessed by my parents, my wife, my kids, myself, and massive debris fields were falling off of these objects. And I actually have a chunk of what fell off of it. And that chunk is right here. It's like a melted blob of rock. And I've tried to get people interested in it. I've sent emails to all kinds of people in that world, but nobody seems to care. I've never had it tested. I don't know what it is, but it was just a strange experience, a strange event. And around that time period, probably, 5 years or so prior to that UFO event, I was paddleboarding in the Columbia River, and I was right on the shoreline of Oregon. And I looked off into the bushes, and there was a person staring at me in a very rural, very hard to get to place. And it was a very dark face, a black face. And it looked like not like a black person, African person, like almost like a dark black India type person. And it was really weird. And I just ignored it, paddled off, and told my parents about it when I got back. Like, why? There was a black person staring at me in the bushes, and Sasquatch wasn't even a thought at this time period. So after the incidents I mentioned, the UFO and just weird things that had happened in that area, years later, I'm here in my neighborhood where I live. I'm at home. And I had been walking nightly up this path near my house. It goes up into a wooded area where there's a bunch of high-end homes up there, but real remote, woodsy kind of area. And one particular night, we were flying to Mexico. We had to be to the airport at midnight. So I wanted to take my dog on a quick walk before the house sitter got there. And so I took my dog up that path, and we're up in the mountain area where the neighboring houses are. And my dog finds a deer laying on the side of the road that had been completely mutilated. Every organ had been removed, everything, lungs, kidney, heart. The front legs had been ripped clean off of this thing. Very weird thing to find in a residential neighborhood at 11 o'clock at night. And there was no blood around it. So whatever had done this to that deer had to have dropped it where we found it. And so I was nervous, just my dog and I, in knowing that there's something nearby that can do this to a deer. So I just took a few pictures and got out of there. Couldn't do anything about calling anybody. I just had to go home. We were loading the car and we were off to the airport. And a week later, we get back home, and I went to check, and the deer was gone. But it was just a really weird thing to find in my neighborhood. So it kind of sent me down this rabbit hole of looking into what could have possibly done this. Cougars, I mean, it's not impossible that a cougar could come through my neighborhood, but it's highly unlikely. In bears, nobody's ever seen bears or cougars in the area that I live in. It's not rural enough. And so I started watching things about Sasquatch and Dogman, and it was a very weird thing to find. And I didn't know what to make of it. And about a month later, I met up at my parents' house, and we were visiting them, and I wanted to go up in the mountains and do some rock hounding. And when I go up in the mountains to rock hound, I bring a generator, I bring a big drill for breaking rocks. It's a big undertaking. And my father and my son came with me, but they took a separate vehicle because they didn't want to sit there all day watching me run power tools. And a lot of times I'll climb up into an embankment, a cliff, and just start digging into the side of it and see what I can pull out of it. In particular areas that we know where you're likely to find certain stones and gems and agates and such. And I'd been spending quite a bit of time on this rock, drilling and breaking, and I just couldn't get this rock out of this boulder. I spent hours on it. I was getting frustrated. So I decided to take a break. And as this was going on, I had been thinking about Bigfoot because of all the videos I've been watching, because of the deer, and I just had it in the back of my mind. And what's really bizarre about this is I stopped what I was doing with the intention of going up to this viewpoint to look into the valley below and see if I could see a Bigfoot. That was my plan. And obviously never in a million years was I actually thinking that I would see one. It was just something, I'm going to go up there and see if I can spot a Sasquatch. And I had to climb up this cliff to get up to the top. And I was flipping rocks and looking for rocks and stuff. As I climbed up there, I had rocks in all my pockets. And so I get up to the top of this viewpoint and I look into this valley. It's a ways away, maybe a quarter mile. I don't know. You're up high and you're looking down in this lower valley. And I see something within a minute of scanning this valley, and I'm staring at this thing and I'm laughing to myself in my head, like, that's funny. That looks like a Bigfoot right there. And like, no, what is that? Is that a shadow? Is that a stump? But it starts walking. I could see arms, legs. It's all one color. Too far away for any facial features or anything. But it was like never in a moment did I ever doubt it was anything but a Bigfoot. It just had all of the characteristics of it. And I'm, just in awe of this, jaw on the floor, staring at this thing. And I start patting my pockets for my phone. All I have is rocks in every pocket. And I see my truck, and I knew that my phone was in my truck. And so I'm staring at this thing, and I'm like, what do I do? Do I go get my phone? Do I stare at this thing? And I'm just debating all this in my head. And I see it walk through these little Christmas tree-sized trees. And it raised its hands and bounced its hands across the tips of the trees. And it was especially weird because I do that when I walk through trees. It was very weird. And so at this point, I'm just like, I need my phone. Nobody's going to believe this. I have to get my phone. And so I fly down the cliff, run to my truck, get the phone. I start running back, and I had rocks in every pocket. So I throw all the rocks out of my pocket, and I climb up this cliff, and I get back up to the top. And I look into the valley, and at first, it's gone. I can't find it. And then it took a minute or so, and I spot it. And it had moved, and it was over in a different area. But I could clearly see it was it. And I got the phone out and started filming. And I originally had like 40 minutes of footage of this thing. But once I put the camera to it, it stayed in one spot. And you can see subtle movements and stuff. It's really vague because I'm up in the clouds. So the clouds kept coming in, blocking my shot. And so at times I'd be completely fogged out. So I would turn the camera off and I'd wait for the clouds to lift, and then I would start filming it again. And this went on for I mean, I was up there for an hour or so staring at this thing, filming this thing. And after a while, it would get so foggy and I couldn't see if it was there. And I'm kind of starting to just question everything. Like, what am I looking at? Is this real? Like, did I really just see a Bigfoot? Am I filming nothing? It was a weird moment. I was definitely questioning my sanity in a sense, because nobody just says, oh, I'm going to go and see if I could spot a Sasquatch and then they're staring at one. That part of the story I don't even like to share, because it's ridiculous. It really is. But it's what happened, and it's how it went down. And as I'm staring at this thing, saying to myself, you mean to tell me these things are actually real? Like, just blown away by such a reality and having to question my own reality and sanity. Like, I didn't know what to think of it all, because for so many years I was so convinced that these things don't exist. And then here I am staring at one. It was a hard moment to digest. And as I'm staring at this thing, and then the clouds would block me out, and then the clouds would rise, and then I could see just this black blob down there. And I wasn't sure what I was seeing. And at the same time, my phone would start ringing, because my wife wanting to know when I'm coming home. And then the clouds would get thicker. And so this kind of went on for, like I said, about an hour, until eventually the clouds were so thick I couldn't see the end of the valley anymore. And a truck had pulled in, some guy in a truck. And at that point I was like, okay, I just need to go. And loaded up everything, went home, immediately told my wife and parents and kids what happened. And of course, they're kind of, are you sure it wasn't this? Could it have been a bear? And all those type of questions. And I showed them the video, and, the video's not super conclusive. It's poor footage. It's blurry, poor footage, which that in itself was just amazing to me, that I became one of those people in possession of blurry, unclear Bigfoot footage, being that I had been laughing and mocking this footage for decades. And I told everybody, we're going up tomorrow. We're going back in the morning, and I got to see what's going on. And we did. And the next morning, it was my whole family, everybody except my mom, I believe, went up there. And as I climbed back up to that same viewpoint and looked into the valley, it was a very sunny, clear day, perfect day. And I could see a stump right there where the creature was at the previous day. And I didn't know there was a stump there, because the body of the Sasquatch had blocked that stump out completely. And so I got footage of the stump, and I've done comparison side-by-side videos on my channel to show, that there's definitely something there blocking the stump. And that was just kind of the beginning of a major undertaking, because I had to prove to myself and to everybody that what I filmed that day was a Sasquatch. When I was first looking into that valley at the Sasquatch, it was really hard to gauge how big or tall it is. It's so far away. And the trees that it was walking through, they were probably 4 foot, 5 foot trees. I don't know for sure. But eventually I get footage of a bear from that same exact perspective. In the size of that bear compared to the Sasquatch. So when I first found this bear with my spotting scope, I thought it was a vulture. I thought it was a black vulture, because vultures get pretty big up there, and a lot of them are really black. And it was a full-size bear. And what that showed me was that the Sasquatch I saw was so much bigger than I ever imagined. Because in a comparison of the bear to the Sasquatch, it would have been able to pick up this bear and throw it on its shoulder and carry it. And so it's probably a smaller bear, but it could just be a normal sized black bear. I don't know. But it really showed me that this creature was big, much bigger than had originally anticipated. And I've never actually made it into this valley to find that stump and do comparisons. And I've had many failed attempts at getting into this valley. And it's frustrating because every time I've set out to get into that valley, some other discovery or something has derailed me in a way where I can't get into that valley. And I mean, for example, I was on the way to that valley one day and I was ran over by a guy in a truck and hauled out of there in an ambulance. Couldn't walk for 2 months. And another time I was trying to get to that valley and I just got a flat tire in my truck. A tire had a nail in it. And then it's just been problem after problem. And I've scoured that whole area, but I've actually just never made it into this valley. It's very hard. Well, I could get into the valley somewhat easily. It's getting out of the valley that makes it really hard. And so that especially shows me that it was not a person walking in there, because I know how damn near impossible it is to get into that valley. And there was a bipedal humanoid creature walking in there. And so I have no doubt that it was not a person. It was all one color. It was all appeared to be hair covered. Obviously, I couldn't see the hairs from that distance. But when I went back up there and on that day with my parents, and I shared the footage with other people, and I could see a level of doubt in people's eyes, and it's understandable. That was kind of when I knew, okay, this is something I have to prove, and I'm going to prove it. And I started buying better camera equipment. I started buying camping gear and really built this arsenal of stuff that I could afford to accumulate to go out and conduct this research. And that's exactly what I did. I started going out on overnight trips by myself, and I started hiking into deep canyons and going into areas that I'd never been in. And pretty early on, I immediately started finding structures that Sasquatch researchers before me had made videos and shown me what to look for. And there they were. I mean, I found this amazing X structure right away, and started finding tree breaks and started finding everything that others have attributed to Sasquatch all over that area. And one day this journey took me deep into this canyon bottom, and I'm following a river, and I'm just wearing sandals, hiking right up this river, and something was following me in the trees that day, and I couldn't see it, but I could hear it. I could hear cracks and breaks and whistles, constantly whistles. And it seemed like the whistles were being directed up the canyon, not towards me, but it is almost like something was notifying down the canyon that somebody's coming. I don't know. And I found a little trail that deviated off of the creek, and I went up that trail and found a big humanoid footprint, probably a size 14. And I have a video of this footprint, and it's just very clear, ankle, toes, everything. A very clear, very awesome footprint. And that was a big moment for me, where I knew, okay, this is all real. You know, I know what I saw. These things exist. The evidence is here. And on that same day, I was going deeper into the canyon, and I found this grove of trees that had all been pushed together in this really unnatural way, this teepee type thing. And so I started paying attention to the trees a lot more that day. And that's when I started finding this anomaly of topped trees everywhere. And I only focus primarily on the evergreen trees, on the conifer trees, because I do tree work for a living. I've done tree work for Department of Natural Resources. I've been a sawyer on a fire crew. I know everything about trees. I know when they should and shouldn't be missing their tops, because trees don't lose their tops. I mean, I can look around right now at 1,000 evergreen trees, and none of these are missing their top. Yet, in my research area, you will find hundreds and hundreds of healthy green evergreens, conifer trees, topless. And the tops of them are all over the ground, everywhere. So that was something I really started paying attention to, because I knew that that's not normal. trees don't break at the top, not in that way. Trees tend to break at the ground. And so following these top trees kind of led me in all these different directions. And everywhere I go, I started finding more and more tree anomalies. I started finding these arches bent in this very weird way. A lot of them are bent and scraped against the neighboring tree and wedged to hold them in that position. Not normal, not natural. And I would find more X structures, and I would find lots of footprints that weren't super clear, but you could tell humanoid shaped footprints. It's really hard to get good footprints in the Pacific Northwest. There's so much moss and debris and stuff like that, but I find footprints constantly. They're just not always the most castable, best footprints. And in this is in a series of overnight camping trips that I would go on, because it's hard to get up there. It's expensive, you know, to be away from work and the cost of it all. But I've been getting up there as much as I can the past 20 months. And early on in this endeavor, I went into a different direction that I'd never been in. And I was hiking down into the depths of this canyon. I call it Dead Canyon. I've named it that since, because of a multitude of reasons I'll get into is why I named it that. But in the bottom of that canyon, I started finding deposits of agates. I'm talking 100-pound agates, and agates I never dreamed existed. I mean, I have some here that are, this is just an example. These are everywhere, and these are blue rare agates. I mean, I have an 80-pound agate here, and it was just something I wasn't expecting, because I had originally gone into that area for rocks, but I was no longer looking for rocks. I was looking for Sasquatch. But everywhere I went, I'm finding agates, amazing agates. But to get them out, you got to hike them out in a pack, and it's a nightmare. So I have to leave most of them behind, but I get them out when I can. But on that day, as I'm climbing out of that canyon, I'd been down there with my dog, and we're almost out. We're 70% out of this canyon, and it's a pretty brutal climb. Something screams at me from the bottom of that canyon in the most just sort of terrifying, just bizarre sound. I've never heard anything like it in the woods. It rattled that whole canyon. You felt it in your body. My dog, who normally would perk up and like act tough in a situation, completely cowered to the sound. And I know whatever that was, I know it was a Sasquatch, because I've been in the woods enough to know what animals sound like. There's never been a sound like that I've ever heard. The volume, the strength of that sound. And that was the first time I'd heard that sound. Very nerve-wracking, almost sort of like a warning type sound. I had debated whether I'd ever return to that canyon. I have many times, but I wasn't sure in that moment if I'd ever go back there. It was that kind of sound. And so I went back to my camp, and the next morning I went on a different direction, a different journey. And I was on an e-bike, and I had to get behind these gates, and it's about a 7-8 mile bike ride on an e-bike. And I abandoned the bike, hid it in the bushes, and I had to cross a river, and then I found a contributory river running into that one, and I followed that river. And this was leading me towards the valley of my very first sighting. It's bringing me into that direction. And as I'm walking up this creek and finding agates everywhere, because that's just how it is there, I look to my left and I see a huge log stabbed into the ground with its roots up in the air. It was an upside down tree. And I had seen videos of people finding those in Alaska, and I had never dreamed of finding an upside down tree. I had thought about them, but it just wasn't something I thought I would find. Immediately knew what it was, immediately recognized it. So I climbed up to the little valley where it was at, and found about 9 of them, logs impaled into the ground, in all different sizes too. Some were big, some were small, some are only this big, stabbed into the ground. Some are up in the air 20 feet. Some had been cut with chainsaws, some hadn't. And because it's a logging wilderness, cuts from chainsaws on logs is everywhere because loggers leave that stuff behind. And so you're hard pressed to find a log up there without a chainsaw cut on it. And I learned in that moment that the Sasquatch don't care if they have roots or not. I've had other people kind of try to debate me about these because, oh, those aren't upside down trees because they don't have roots. But I have since found so many of these, and I'll get into that. And I have a theory I'm pretty convinced of why they're doing this. But in this moment, I didn't know why they would do it. I thought maybe it's a show of who's the boss, you know, who's the alpha, or I had all kinds of theories on why they're doing it, but I didn't know. But I was just amazed to find these. And I'm up there in the valley looking around, and it's a very eerie, very uncomfortable feeling. And I made some videos real quick, and I didn't feel good. I didn't feel like I should be there. I don't know. I just felt nervous, and I got out of there. But that was kind of the next kind of big step in this, where I really knew that I'm onto something. There's just so much activity up there. And went back home and got a hold of a friend of mine who's a geologist and started telling him about the rocks I'm finding. And he was pretty intrigued because he's a rock guy, and we had agreed to do a trip together up there, and we were going to do a day trip. No overnight, just get in, get out. And so I picked him up at 4 a.m. and we drove up there and got up there real early in the morning. And as we were heading to this certain area where I was going to lead him into one of these canyon bottoms, I see new arches on the side of the road. Amazing new arches that weren't there last time I was there. And so I said to him, hey, I have to go look at these. This is a big deal. These weren't here a few weeks ago, a month ago. And so we went and we're looking at them, and I'm videoing them on my cell phone and talking about them. And these are really bizarre ones that had been bent and not just slightly wedged against a neighboring tree. It looks like it had been gouged and chiseled. And I mean, I just don't know how they did it, because I would need a knife, I would need a chisel, I would need tools to create what they did. And they bent this tree and they hooked it into this crutch where it is all dug out, and they're both dug out and they're hooked. And as I'm filming this thing and just in awe of it, because it defies everything I know about natural tree behavior, Brent, the geologist, says to me, hey, look at this. And he picks up this big pine cone. And I'm kind of like thinking, you know, why do you care about a pine cone? You know, and I'm looking at this, and he's had to explain to me, like, no, you don't understand. This is a tree that does not grow in this region. This is not a native tree. It had to have been brought here. And he's a scientist. He's a smart guy. I took his word for it. And so I'm, you know, okay, that's pretty cool discovery. And we took it out, we put it in a bag and brought it out. We did our hike and explored this amazing river all day. And a few months later, I'm planning another trip up there with my son, who was 9 at the time, and my buddy Joe, the three of us. And on this trip, my son and I were out investigating a different arch that I'd found. I didn't know if it was new for sure, but I'd never seen it before. And as I'm filming it, my son goes, hey, Dad, what's this? And I look, and sure enough, he's pointing at the ground to another one of these subalpine pine cones. And this one had been stuck in the mud. It wasn't just laying there, because the first pine cone, the geologist had found it. I didn't see how it was laid on the ground. It was in his hand when I first saw it. And this one that my son found was clearly stabbed into the mud, intentionally stuck there. It's not something that would have just fallen and pierced the earth. It was stabbed into the ground. And this is the type of pine cone right here. They don't look like this when you find them. They were green, very fresh pine cones. And I did what research I can on them. And they're a subalpine tree that needs an elevation of 4,000 to 6,000 feet. My entire research area is pretty low. It's all about 1,500 elevation. So these trees will not grow in that area, period, according to what I've researched on them. And another interesting thing about this particular tree is the Native Americans use this tree for a series of different treatments for all kinds of ailments. And it was a really important tree for ceremonial purposes. And so that was a very interesting discovery, because it correlates Sasquatch to very similar things as Native Americans. And I have other discoveries that I'm going to get to that also correlate Sasquatch to similar things as Native Americans that I've since found. But the pine cones, that was weird. It was a new discovery. It was a new mystery. I didn't know what to make of it. And I was real happy that it had been found. And so on that same camping trip with my son and Joe, we were in the campsite one night. We'd all gone to bed. This is middle of the night, about 4 a.m. And my phone was set to wake me up, because I was going to go out in the middle of the night with my night vision and just walk around until the sun came up. So my phone wakes me up. I believe I had it vibrating by my head or something. And so I'm sitting there in my tent, groggy, debating, am I really going to go do this, or am I just going to go back to sleep? And I have lights all set up in my campsite, because whenever I'm up there on a research mission, I set up a Christmas light type rave type thing in the woods, because I'm trying to create something that would pique the Sasquatch's curiosity, something they've never seen in the woods. And so I throw all this stuff together, and it's like a low budget rave going on all night, and I leave it on in the middle of the night, especially with my son there, because it's very quiet and very eerie where I camp. In this spot I refer to as base camp, my main campsite. It's dark and just dead quiet there. And so the lights go all night. And so as I'm sitting in my tent, 4 a.m., debating getting up, I see something standing over my tent. And I didn't notice it right away. I think it was probably still, because it heard me wake up. And I'm staring at this huge shadow right above me, just feet from me. And I'm like, what is that? And I can see movement. I can see it move back and forth. And all I have between us is just a nylon tent, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't really know, but I picked up my camera and I go to turn the camera on. Camera makes this beep beep sound, and this shadow just goes whoosh, gone. Silent, but gone in a flash. And that really got my heart rate going, and I'm thinking, wow, okay, I don't know what to do. And I didn't have much of a plan anyway, because yeah, the camera was turned on, but I still had to unzip the tent and crawl out. I mean, I don't know what my plan was, but it was gone. And I'm sitting there thinking, should I get out of the tent, leave my son here by himself? My dog was in there, and she didn't even wake up. She was sound asleep, didn't smell this thing, didn't sense it, nothing. And I laid there for a while, just not really sure what I should do, and ended up falling back asleep. Woke up around 7 something in the morning. I crawl out of the tent. I start making coffee, and my buddy, who was sleeping in his car, he gets out of his car because he hears us making noise, and he's like, man, what were you doing last night? All over my car, looking in the windows of my car. And I'm like, Joe, I didn't come out of the tent last night. And he had thought that was me playing with night vision in the middle of the night, but it wasn't. It was something else in our campsite. And so that was, I know that was a Sasquatch in our tent, because bears are clumsy. They don't tiptoe through your camp in the middle of the night. This was during hunting season. The deer are so spooked during that time period. We hadn't seen any other campers. There was no other vehicles around. I mean, I know it wasn't a person walking through my tent or camp at 4 a.m. You're liable to get shot doing that during hunting season. And so that was the first time one of these things had entered my campsite. And since then, I know of 2 other occasions. There's been 3 occasions now that they have definitely entered my camp in a way where I know they did. And I will explain the other 2. But so that's the closest I've ever been to one. And that really kind of showed me even more so that, okay, I'm on to something. Every mission is progressing. Something new is happening. And around that time period, I'm trying to think, because I've been setting up trail camps. At one point, I had 17 trail cams out there. Currently, I don't know. I probably have 8 or something set up out there. Actually, on the way home on that trip, there was a pretty cool experience just my son and I had. As I'm leaving, I'm always filming. I always have a camera on me at all times up there. A helmet cam, a body cam, my nice camera in my hand, my cell phone in my pocket. And so I went down some road with my son, and he was ready to go. I mean, he's 9. I've been dragging him through the woods for days. And I said, okay, bud, we're just going down one more road, and we're gonna, look around, and then we'll get out. And I deviate down a road, pull in and park, and I get out with my camera. My son's getting out, and right then, this loud whoop just comes whoop from the forest, and then another one from off in that direction comes off in the forest, and it was awesome timing. My son right away looked at me like, was that an owl? And I said, well, it's the middle of the day. It doesn't sound like an owl. And I told him, I said, I think that's them. I think that's a whoop. And it was almost like a goodbye or something. And that was the first kind of moment where I really contemplated that these things might actually be communicating with me or aware of what I'm doing. And since then, there's been many experiences that have led me to be very solidified in that belief that they know and they're aware of me, and I will get into that. So we went home, and I immediately started planning my next trip. And my next trip was, I don't know, a month later or so, and I was going up there alone for 3 nights. And on that trip, I set up my camp and started going around doing what I do. I found a new X structure not far from my campsite, a really interesting one, which has since collapsed. But I have video of that one. I have video of everything I'm talking about. And on this trip, I wanted to get to the valley where I saw the Sasquatch. And so I had to drive my truck way to the far end of this mountain and park it at a gate, and then e-bike deep into this area. And I found a bunch of amazing tree arches and bends all along this drive, new ones I'd not seen. I was really excited to be getting into this certain area that's really hard to get to. And that's when a truck came out of nowhere, speeding, and hit me on my bike, ran me over, pulled me under its carriage of this big truck. And the guy hit reverse and just dragged me in the bike. And I was in bad shape. My knee ended up having 14 stitches across my knee and a lot of damage to my shin. And I ended up leaving that area in an ambulance. And so that mission got pretty screwed up. Eventually, I was walking again. My legs were okay. I still have issues, but healed for the most part. And my Father's Day was coming up. And it was the day before Father's Day that I had my sighting. So my wife asked, what do you want to do for Father's Day? And I said, I don't care. No matter what, I'm going to be up in my research area. It's the 1 year to the day. That's where I'm going. So she said, well, if that's where you're going, I guess you got to take all of us too. And, okay. And I wasn't excited to have all of them there because a lot of the places I go to are really hard to get to. I didn't want to drag my wife and kids through a lot of these climbs, but it was fine. There was enough stuff I could do up there with them. And so we're up there. We set up camp in the normal base camp type spot, and we go down and we're exploring a river off in a canyon. And I'm with my daughter, and in the sand was a child footprint, smaller than her foot. And I have the video. It's on one of my channels. It had been there a while. It had had some rain hit it. It wasn't super clear, but it was a footprint. I mean, it was a humanoid shaped footprint to a very small child. And I've never seen a kid in this area ever. I've never even encountered a person in the woods up there. The only time I've ever bumped into a person up there is on the gravel roads. So I know it's a Sasquatch footprint in this area. It's just not conceivable that a barefoot kid would be running around out there. And you know, I had my own kid there, but I know what it was. And so that was the first time I'd ever found a juvenile footprint. And I have since found more of these. But that was just pretty cool. Okay, good discovery. Got the wife and kids up here. That's something to document. I could have been fine with just that. You know, every trip up, I like to find something, some kind of documented evidence of Sasquatch. But we're driving, I had the whole family in the truck, and we're heading up towards the viewpoint where I had my first sighting. Because this was on the 1-year anniversary, the day of. And as I'm driving down the road, I see something in the middle of the road. And it's something weird, and I stop, and I ask my wife, what is that? You know, she's like, how the hell do I know what that is? And it looked like a big blob of hair, like a big dead animal or something in the middle of the road, just strewn out in the gravel, in the weirdest place you'd ever expect to find anything. So I get out, and I go look at it, and sure enough, it's a ball of hair this big, and it's a mix of this gray, brown, black hair. It's very weird hair. It's 3 to 4 times the diameter of any human hair I've ever put next to it. Some of it is over a foot long. Some of it is short. It's kind of just this huge ball of hair, and it's all the same. You know, it all originated from the same source, because you got gray ones and black ones and brown ones that will be entwined within actual locks. For like, this used to be a really good example of the locks, but unfortunately my kitten got a hold of this when I wasn't looking, and it had its way with it. But this used to be a bunch of really clear, almost dreadlock like locks of the hair, and these locks will have all the different colors all mixed throughout it. This was, you know, pretty crazy to find, especially just laying in the middle of the road. And, you know, if some people have, you know, said, oh, it could be horsehair. And I suppose it could be, but I've never seen a horse in my research area. Never once. I've never seen horse dung on the roads up there. It would be very inhospitable terrain for horseback riding. The gravel roads are brutal, full of big jagged rocks. I've popped several tires on those gravel roads now, and there's no good trails up there because everything's so steep. Everything's canyons. Everything's just logging wilderness. So I'm in the process of getting answers on this hair right now. I have samples with Melba Ketchum. I have samples with the study out of NCSU. I'm waiting on some kind of definitive word of what this hair is. But it was a pretty cool thing to find, especially 1 year to the day of my sighting. Just a weird coincidence. And it's almost like the hair was placed in that road, because this road is a road that I have named Tree Break Alley, because obviously it's inundated with sign, tree breaks, and top trees and arches are everywhere. On this same road is where I found the 2 pine cones. And on this same road is where 70% of all my research takes place on Tree Break Alley, because there's just so much to be found on all over Tree Break Alley. So that was pretty amazing. On that trip, you know, found the hair, found the footprint. I wasn't expecting really to find anything more. But that same day, later back at camp, was the first time I'd ever heard a wood knock. You know, I'm sitting there and just out of nowhere, just this crack just echoes through the camp. And I'd never been a big knocker. I don't bang on trees and stuff like that, but it was clear as day a wood knock. It was really pretty cool. As we were packing up to go home, we were done with all the research and everything. We are just going to get home. We'd been there for 3 nights, I believe. Might have been 2 nights. And on the way home, I stop and check trail cams all along the way. And as I'm getting to the bottom of what I call Sasquatch Mountain, the main research area, I climb up to check some trail cams that were beneath these arches. It's 2 arches, 2 amazing arches. And I'd put 2 trail cams there months before. And I pull the chip out and I put the chip in my little reader, and in broad daylight, this trail cam captured a blob of white light moving through the trees. And I believe there's 3 or 4 shots of it. And if you click through them in order, you can see this weird disfigured blob of white moving through the shots. And in one of the shots, it creates a footprint, and all of that is captured. And that's on a video on my channel as well. And so that was pretty amazing, because if you go out in broad daylight and you fire up a lantern or a bright flashlight or anything, you can't even tell that they're on, because the sunlight is so bright that it just overrides most light. So whatever this is in broad daylight, it's emitting an immense amount of light, because it's visible enough that it triggered the trail cam, and it's very visible. So at that point, I had been staying away from the woo kind of stuff. I've been trying to be much more like, I want my research to be something that non-believers can wrap their head around. But that was pretty weird. That showed me that there's something going on in these woods that does not make sense and defies most people's common understanding of reality. And then another, so it's hard to keep track of everything. This is all taking place over 20 months. So then there was another incident that really opened my eyes to the woo thing. And now that I think about it, this actually took place on the camping trip that I got ran over on. So I need to jump back to that trip now. I had been up all night. And like I said, that was a trip I was all alone out in the woods. And I set up my hunting blind, and I was sitting in this very chair, and I was up all night in this blind that you can't tell if anybody's in it, but you can see out of it in every direction. And I sat there for 6 hours drinking coffee all night. Nothing happened. No sounds, no anything. The sun started coming up, so I went to bed around 6 in the morning. And I'm been asleep for a few hours, pretty dead to the world, and it's about 9 a.m. and this sound vibrates my camp. This crazy sound. And I wake up and I'm thinking, whoa, what's going on? Like, that must be a logging crew, or that's heavy equipment, or, you know, what is that? Like, pretty dead, pretty groggy. I'd been up all night, only been asleep a few hours, and so I went back to sleep. And then I don't know how much time, minutes, seconds, I don't know, but it blasted into my camp again, the same sound. And I'm just kind of rolling over. I had an earplug in one ear, no earplug in the other, because that's how I sleep, because the birds are so noisy in the morning. And so I put the ear back into the pillow, and I'm just like, what is going on? And then a third time that hits my tent, and I suddenly realize that is the sound from Dead Canyon. That is the sound that blasted me and my dog months prior. And I, heart's pounding. I jump up, run out, and I'm in my camp, bright sunny day, and I'm looking every direction. Nothing's there. It's just, silent with the birds and normal sounds. Pretty nervous, because I knew that sound, and it's a very weird sound that I've never noticed any other researchers to ever have captured. I've listened to all the sounds that are available that people have documented, and this sound is is very different than anything they've ever captured. It's almost like a woodpecker, but more like a jackhammer type sound. It's this repetitive sound, but I can't emulate it. I can't recreate it. It's so loud, so powerful, but it has this repeated kind of nature to it. It's bizarre. And that's why I thought it was machinery or something when I heard it from a dead sleep. And so as I'm kind of just trying to absorb what's going on, I look over and I had set a big red apple on the ground right in front of a trail cam. This is just 5 feet from my tent, right there. Trail cam aimed right at it, but my tent is just out of shot of the trail cam. And the apple was gone. I knew that apple was there when I went to bed just a few hours prior because I looked right at it. So I get my chip reader, I run up to the camera, I pull the chip out, put it in, boom, and I'm looking, going through the pictures, and there's the apple, there's the apple, there's the apple, and then there's no apple. The apple was just removed with no picture taken. Now, these trail cams, they take pictures of butterflies that fly by. I mean, you have a fern blowing in the wind and it'll take pictures of it. So a bird can't take an apple. I mean, that was my first introduction to accepting that there's something to the woo side of this phenomenon, because you can't make sense of that. Something screamed into my camp and removed the apple. And so then months later, I'm up there with my family and the trip that I just described, and I pull out that chip and I have actual photographic evidence of something moving through the trees that shouldn't exist. So that, it's kind of opened my eyes to what everybody's been saying, that there's truth to it, and kind of forced me to have to at least accept that and share that, which deviated from my original plan of trying to stick to everything as scientific and believable as possible. My buddy Joe had originally shown me this area for our rock hunting hobby. And so I wanted to get up there with Joe and get a research mission kind of happening. And he and I planned it out months ahead of time. And we were up there for a few days together. And I took him to Dead Canyon, to the area where I had that scream hurled at me early in my research. I had trail cams set up in there. And we get down into the bottom of Dead Canyon, and we're approaching one of my main trail cams down there. And we find a dead elk, a bull elk. This is the skull from him. And the entire body of this thing was there. And what was frustrating and interesting about this was it was only a few paces out of reach of my trail cam. So nothing that went on with this elk was captured on that trail cam. Almost like it was taunting me or something. Like, how is that possible that this elk that was butchered with a trail cam right there next to it and not anything? There was no bear, no cougar, nothing that was picked up on the trail cam. And this elk had all of its bones there, and something had taken a rib bone off of the rib cage and stuck it in the moss of a boulder. And it was like a marker, because we could see that rib bone as we're walking down the shoreline. It was clear, like a marker. And in order to pick up that rib bone and put it in the moss, that requires fingers and hands. So that was very strange. And then as we're examining the elk carcass and everything, we realized that on the ledge up above, all of the big meaty leg bones had been separated and piled. And there's not a lot of animals out in the wild that separate bones like this. It was, super strange. And so I, documented that as best I could. And we were in there for hours that day, and I got footage that day of a amazing school of salmon coming through there. There's so much food and game and berries in this area. The food in there is just unbelievable for a creature like Sasquatch. And Joe and I found a lot of interesting stuff on that trip, but a lot of the same old type of things, you know, more tree breaks and bends and arches. I mean, we're always finding stuff like that. And on the way home, I stopped again, went back up to that same trail cam that was underneath the arches, the same trail cam that had captured the orb-like entity in the broad daylight. And so that trail cam had new footage of what appears to be a bipedal-like figure in the middle of the night. And it's just there all of a sudden, which is interesting in itself because I have enough trail cams to know that if an elk or a deer or anything enter the shot, you're going to get multiple shots or pictures of it meandering through. But this one's different. It's just, there it is. And it's hard to see because it's almost translucent, and it's bipedal-like. Its head is kind of hard to see, and it clicks through 3 pictures of this thing with just slight movement, and then it just disappears. And there's 3 or 4 more pictures of this weird black swirl that is almost like an obscurity. And some people have said, oh, that's just moisture on the lens. But I've seen a lot of moisture on lenses. I know what it looks like. And this is just very different to me. And Joe and I, we were done with that trip. And I'm trying to remember everything. There's always things I'm forgetting. But the next big trip that I planned was going to be broke up over, it was 4 nights, and it was going to be 2 nights with a friend of mine, Elia, and then 2 nights with a friend of mine coming in from Mexico, Colin. And initially, Elia and I were so rained out that we weren't having a whole lot of success, but I was starting to find a new anomaly where something had gone through my research area and was picking up the broken treetops. As I talked about, broken trees are everywhere, top trees. Now these treetops are getting picked up and they're getting stabbed into the ground. And so I've always wondered, what is the upside down trees for? Why would they do this? So much energy to do this, so much energy to break the treetops, and now to go around and pick up and stab these into the ground. And so Ellie and I were out walking in the rain, and I was finding more and more of these, and it was really strange. And then we also found a massive tree break that was new, I'd never seen, and an arch that I'd never seen. And that's when Elia found more pine cones, more of these subalpine pine cones. And just like the other ones, they were below or very near a weird structure of some sort. And they shouldn't be there because it's not a tree that grows in that region. And that's when I was looking at the pine cones. It's hard to see in this one because it's dried out so much. But that was something I forgot to mention about the original pine cones. They always have bite marks in them. What look like bite marks. And I have the original ones frozen. I've always hoped that I could get DNA testing off of them. I didn't bother with the ones that Elia found to keep them frozen or anything because it was raining so bad during that time period that I figured anything would be washed off of them anyway. But then Elia goes home and I meet Colin, and Colin comes out with me for 2 nights. So Colin and I go and explore an area that I hadn't spent much time in, but I had recently on some prior trips found 5 arches all in one area. And I also found a bunch of what looked like broken remnants of old arches. So considering that trail cam had all that luck underneath the double arches, this area with 5 arches is kind of a new area of great importance to me. And we go exploring the arches and we're looking at those. Immediately we find footprints in the moss. Pretty clear, nice footprints. And as we're climbing up the hill, Colin finds what looks like a tree that had been spiraled around another tree. And these are evergreen trees, conifer trees. It wasn't like so amazing that it couldn't be blamed on Mother Nature, but it was bizarre. It wasn't normal. Trees don't typically do that. Evergreen trees grow with uniformity, so when you find them doing weird things, it's just not normal. Then we go up a little further, a few hundred yards up into the hills, and we find a double conifer tree that has been spiraled and spiraled and spiraled and spiraled. Now, to recreate this would have taken decades of manipulation. For me to create this would have taken 20 years of tying and wrapping and bending to create this sort of spiral type look. It's super weird. And since then, I've found more of these. And these are something I've never seen in any evergreen forest ever in my life. But yet there they are in this area, inundated with all these anomalies. And here's a new anomaly that doesn't make any sense. And I have a video all about this. And as Colin and I were continuing to explore the forest, we started finding new upside down trees, new logs, huge ones impaled into the ground. I can't even count how many there are now. And I had never seen any of these in the previous, summers and springs and all my trips up there. I never noticed any of these upside down trees. I used to go for miles and miles and miles, a major hike, climb, endeavor to get to upside down trees. Now, I can just walk in any direction in my research area and I'm finding logs impaled into the ground. And so I've always wanted to know, what are they doing this for? And I had somebody contact me through my channel, and a self-proclaimed remote viewer told me that they are doing this to grow grubs, to rot and grow grubs. And when this person told me that, I thought, wow, that's actually a pretty good idea, because I had been pretty obsessed with the fact that wood-eating insects and grubs is a major part of their food source, because I find evidence of that everywhere. But bears also do that. So, you have to consider that. But bears can't pick up logs and impale them into the ground. And so I was more and more looking at these and thinking about that. Well, that would just make so much sense. Why would they go to all this work? It doesn't make sense that it's a display of dominance, because some of them are just tiny little trees stabbed into the ground. Some of them are enormous. Some of them are short, tall. Some of them are just little treetops. It's everything you can think of, just stabbed into the ground in the most bizarre way, and they're everywhere. Colin and I did a lot of hiking and just tromping through the trees. And he was pretty blown away by what I was showing him, because he knew what I'd been doing. He and I had been in regular communication, but he wasn't expecting anything to the extent of what I was showing him. It's everywhere you go, there's evidence of something that shouldn't be going on. And he had seen videos about Dead Canyon, and he wanted to get into Dead Canyon. So I agreed to take him there. And it's a bit of an undertaking getting to Dead Canyon. And we climb into the bottom of Dead Canyon, and I take him off in a direction I'd never been in. And sure enough, over on the far side of Dead Canyon, we find evidence. We find about a dozen logs unnaturally stabbed into the ground, just sticking straight up. These ones all had chainsaw marks on them, which is really weird because there's no active logging in that area at all. And these were fresh trees. So somehow all those trees ended up in this canyon. It makes no sense. And then somehow they ended up impaled into the ground. And as we're hiking out of there, we're following the shoreline, and Colin finds what looks like a possible footprint in the sand, but it had been kind of washed away. Wasn't real clear. We kept walking, and we find an agate. So this is a big chunk of chert that came out of my research area. Now, this type of rock was massively important to the Native Americans. This is chert. It's a great rock for making arrowheads, for making spearheads. And I had always kind of wondered if there was any correlation between all of these types of rare rocks in these canyons with the Sasquatch, because the Native Americans used to go to war with other tribes over controlling ground that had rocks like this, because these rocks were so important to their tool making. And so I've always had to at least consider the possibility that the same might be the case for Sasquatch, because they are so prevalent in this area, and so are agates and rocks that you don't find elsewhere. And so Colin and I come up on a rock that had been shattered to pieces. And this is a chunk of chalcedony, which you could make fabulous spearheads, arrowheads. And this chunk was from a big boulder, yay big, that had been shattered into pieces. And pieces of it were strewn about everywhere. And it looked exactly like you would expect to find if somebody was doing tool making. Because these rocks are very dense. They don't break. All of these rocks have survived millions of years of being in rivers and eroding mountains, and they just don't break. They're very solid, very strong rocks. So to break one of these and shatter them in that way, it doesn't happen naturally. Something had to have shattered those rocks. So we were pretty stunned by that discovery, and I made a video of all the pieces, and I took this one with me. Later, when I looked at the video footage, there was a footprint in the gravel right where all these shards of rock was at, but we didn't notice it because we were so focused on the shards of rocks. So as we're, blown away by this and trying to wrap our head around just everything that we're finding, I start seeing agates about this big sitting on top of boulders. Now, when I'm rock hunting and I find agates that I really like, I set them up on top of boulders so I can find them at a later time. But this was an area I had never gone in, so none of these rocks were put there by me. And I have game cameras in there. People are not in there. People don't go in there. And so it was just super weird to find rocks on top of rocks like that. That could not have happened on their own. So I had to think, like, is something mimicking me? Are they giving me gifts on purpose? Like what's going on? And so as we get deeper into the canyon and I'm entering into the area that I've been in before, area I'm very familiar with, sure enough, we get to where the elk's at, was the elk carcass had been at. And on top of those boulders was new agates that had been placed right up on top of them. So definitely weird, should not have been there. And I even had to go back to old footage and confirm that there was no way Joe and I had put those rocks there. And we didn't. I had footage of us leaving the canyon, and those boulders didn't have agates on top of them. And so this is a cold winter day, and I had to get across this river to get to my other trail cam. And in order to do that, I got to take my clothes off, and I just wore my underwear and walked across this river, freezing cold. And I get over to this trail cam, and underneath this trail cam, laying on the ground, is a beheaded Chinook salmon. And in that moment, I didn't really absorb how amazing this was, because I was a little freaked out. I'm always uneasy in Dead Canyon. And I had to think, like, oh, did we disturb a predator? Like, is there a bear waiting to come finish this meal? And so I pulled the chip out of the trail cam and crossed back to the river. And I have footage of the fish and everything. But once I really looked at that footage and really started thinking about that fish, there's no animal in nature that rips the heads off of fish. There's otters that'll bite the heads off of fish. There's bear that'll bite the heads off of fish. But even bear typically eat the stomach of the fish, not the head. And you can see clear the way this fish's head was severed from it. Something had to stick their fingers in the gills and pry separately, and you can see where the salmon has been smashed and its spinal cord sticking out of it. I mean, in the strength to rip a Chinook's head off of its spinal cord, I'm going to get a Chinook and I'm going to try to do it with my own bare hands. I don't know that I can even do it because that takes a lot of strength, and they're slippery and slimy. And the fact that it was right underneath my trail cam, the same trail cam where it's almost like this elk carcass was a game that was being taunting me, like laughing at my trail cam. Now they put the beheaded Chinook directly underneath it. Right there is agates on top of rocks that shouldn't be there. I mean, for me, this was all pretty conclusive that they are communicating or giving me gifts or letting me know that they're aware of me, because I've left food for them countless times. Every time I leave my camp, I leave food behind for them. And so I really strongly believe that that was a gift in a message, in a huge step in a interesting direction where potential communication might be on the horizon. I don't know for sure. And I have had an incident where rocks were thrown at me. And this happened earlier on. I kind of forgot this story, but it was in December, last December, when I hiked in and got to my main upside down tree site. And there was a big agate then that was propped up and left on top of a rock. And I've filmed it, and I kind of dismissed it as, well, it could have been a hunter, you know, it could have been anybody that left that there. But I really think that that was a gift as well. I think they've been probably trying to do this, and I just haven't been picking up on it. But now I'm really seeing it. And on that day when that agate was sitting on that rock, 3 times that day, rocks were thrown at me. And I was filming while all this happened, and it's in my upside down tree video. And the first time one of those rocks went bing bing, went bouncing on the rocks, I didn't see where it came from, and I heard it. I didn't make a big deal about it because I didn't want it to seem staged or hoax, because I was filming while it happened. But I talked about it and said, well, either a rock just fell from the embankment and came tumbling down, or something just threw a rock at me. And then that happened 2 more times in that day, where I'm just standing there filming and rocks just went bing, bing, bing and bounced by me. And I'm confident that in future missions up there, that there's going to be some kind of communication. I really think that we're getting to the point where they're beyond letting me know that they're comfortable with me or aware of me. And especially on that last trip with Colin, when we got back to camp that night, we went to bed, and this was the final morning. We were going to be packing out and leaving that day. As I came out of the tent, Colin was all excited and brings me over to my truck. And there was a series of footprints right through our campsite. And one of them very clear right next to my truck. And I have video footage of it, but we casted that one. This was the first time I've ever been a part of casting a footprint, just because it's so hard to cast out there. It's so mossy and leafy, and it didn't come out great, but you could see really clear toe prints. On the ground, I didn't have a lot of faith in this footprint because it was in a gravel road. And this gravel road is old and it's covered in moss and leaves, but you could see the toes really clear and you could see the ankle pretty clear. But when I peeled this cast off the ground, it pulled a lot of rock and debris with it that I had to pick out. But yeah, to me, that was intentional. I don't think that footprint was an accident. I think it was them letting me know. And that would be the 3rd time that they have entered the campsite with me in there that I know of. Now, there's been some other incidents where I've woke up, 2 times I've woke up in the morning and found that my kitchen tent had been unzipped, because I zip it up every night. I mean, because of raccoons and animals, I never go to bed without zipping up that, because I have a separate tent for my kitchen, a separate tent that I sleep in. And so 2 times I found that unzipped, which was pretty weird, but I don't count that as one of the times that I know that they were in my campsite, but I suspect it. And another time I came back to my camp in my old kitchen tent, the one I don't use anymore. Something had pressed down on the tent so hard that it snapped the pole. And that can't happen from wind. That can't happen from a bird. I mean, so I assume that they were curious or playing with it and they just broke it. And that's why I have to use a different kitchen tent now. Early on in my research, when I was exploring these canyons and I was real new to everything out there, I had an experience where I kept seeing a bright orange something in the trees, and I'd only catch glimpses of it and it would disappear. And I tried to get footage of it. I tried to find it, but I never could get a shot of it. And I just kept seeing it, but I'm in the bottom of the canyon and this was way up on the top. And it's just such a strange color, a brightish red fire orange color that I was never looking for. I was never thinking about. But at one point I was going through old footage from my spotting scope, because I spent a lot of time on mountaintops, just spotting, scoping and zooming in on elk and animals and stuff. And I came across this piece of footage where I'm panning with the camera and I come by a stump and there is this bright orange little cone that very much so looks like it could be the head of a Sasquatch, as if it was sitting against the stump and only its head is exposed. But I never stopped and zoomed in on it. It was just some accidental footage. And so that color is something I'm looking for, which is just crazy to think that they could have that color would stand out so much. Bright orange, it would only blend in the the end of the summer when the leaves are turning orange. But I don't know for sure what it is, but it's definitely a color I'm looking for. It's just crazy, the amount of evidence that is in my research area. I follow other researchers and I see what other people are doing, and I'm not trying to say I'm the greatest or anything of that sort, but I'm just not aware of any research site that has the bounty of evidence that I'm finding in this research area. There's something unique. There's something special going on up there. It's I don't know. And I look at the upside down trees now, and I made a video about this, trying to make sense of the upside down trees. To me, what it is they are impaling these into the ground because they eat wood-eating insects. Wood-eating insects is a major snack for them because I find evidence of it everywhere. In the first Sasquatch I ever saw, my very first sighting, it spent an hour at that stump or better. What would it be doing at that stump? It was digging in it, it was tearing it apart, and it was looking for grubs. That's my suspicion. And I found so much evidence of this now. And then with suddenly the appearance of hundreds of treetops and logs and sticks stabbed into the ground, I have to assume that they're doing that to accelerate the rot, to create an environment where they can go through and they can find grubs. So it's basically a farm is what I believe they have created, a grub farm. And I don't know that the Native Americans would eat grubs, but I do know that natives all over the earth do eat wood-eating insects and grubs still to this day. So obviously, I mean, why wouldn't something like a Sasquatch? And so I do think they're very intelligent in that they have created a farm all across the area I'm investigating. And then when I find evidence of tool making, rocks being broken, and I have found evidence of carving and gouging and digging into trees, that maybe they could do with their claws, but I doubt it. Why? When they could pick up a razor sharp rock and use it, and the rocks are endless. They will never run out of rocks for tool making up there. And then when I look at the Native Americans' importance of the subalpine tree, and I'm finding subalpine cones being brought in and placed for whatever reason, I don't know, but it's happening and I'm finding them. And so I think there's just massive evidence that they are very similar to the natives, to the Native Americans, that they live like them and they're a family unit like them, tribal unit. You know, it's just, and it's not something that you hear a lot of comparisons made, but I fully think that's what's going on. In the fish that they left, you know, they killed the fish. Only humans, when we catch fish, do we behead them or kill them in a hurry so they don't suffer. And only a human or something like a human could have done what happened to that fish. And that was like a gift, almost like the beginning of what I think will be a relationship of gift exchanges. And it's funny because like I said, I've left a lot of food for them over the years, but I hadn't been leaving food. I just, for whatever reason, kind of stopped. And so it makes me wonder if they put that fish there to maybe reignite me leaving food for him because I hadn't been doing it anymore. And, you know, it's a speculation, but it's a speculation with a lot of evidence to support it. You know, everything that I talk about, all of my discoveries, all of my experiences, nearly every single thing that I've mentioned here today, I have some kind of proof of it, whether it's a physical object or video footage or photographic. Everything I have is in some way, shape, or form can be corroborated through that. So yeah, we got to talk about this shofar horn. So, about a year ago, when I was getting involved with this research and really knew that it was something that I was going to pursue, I had reached out to a Flash of Beauty to see if they were interested in me telling my story. And they agreed to meet and talk about things. And so I just randomly picked one of their videos before meeting with them and happened to play the video where Kunbo, I don't know his real name, he talked about the shofar horn. And I was pretty blown away by it because I have owned this horn for 15 years. I never even knew what it was called. I knew nothing about it. It was a gift given to me by a friend because he'd had it for years and he couldn't make it work. And I used to play the trumpet so I could pick it up and blow it. And he's like, wow, I didn't even think that thing would work. And so he just gave it to me. So I've had it a long time. And I have blown this thing around my house countless times over the years. And so it's something I have to just wonder. I mean, very strange coincidence, you know, that I found that deer in my neighborhood and next thing you know, I'm finding a Sasquatch on a mountaintop, and it's just interesting. And it's a crazy coincidence. Even crazy that, I mean, the one channel or one video that I click on and watch that night before meeting with them, it's that one with the horn. And so I don't know if it has magical powers. I don't know any of that, but at some point I will take it out into my research area and I will blow it. I just haven't done it yet, but I'm going to. I just don't know when. I would think it'd be cool to do while live streaming on my channel. You know, I'm not really set up to do a live stream yet, but it's something I'll probably do at some point. And just, who knows, and see if they come. All of what I've talked about today is on Northwest Yeti Quest. It's a YouTube channel. I have new videos coming out all the time, but it's pretty much every single story I have to tell you can find a video to back it up or illustrate it in some way, shape, or form. Oh, I constantly talk to people who think that this is all crazy and not real. And what I say to them is, okay, if you can actually sit down and watch my channel and follow my videos from my first sighting onward, and you can still tell me that you don't believe in Sasquatch at least a little bit, then you're either lying or you assume I'm lying, because you can't look at all the evidence, and not only me, but all the evidence that other people have compiled, and say that there's nothing there. I mean, you just can't. There's a lot of people that just refuse to accept it because they're stubborn and they don't want to admit that they were wrong. And I used to be that way. I didn't want to be wrong. I was convinced it's not real, but it's real. I wish I could say what they are and how they are, but there's just so many mysteries surrounding them. But that's what I'm trying to do, is figure them out and make sense of how something can exist but not exist at the same time, because they're real, but what they are and how they exist is a whole another mystery that's hopefully going to get solved. And I know at least what I'm going to do is make major contributions towards proving the existence of Sasquatch. I already have in just my first 20 months of doing this. And so I can only imagine what I'm going to find and where it's all going to go in the years to come, because I'm not stopping anytime soon. I mean, as long as I can walk those forests and climb those hills, I'm going to keep accumulating evidence and keep doing this.